Brandon had always been the one to keep things afloat, paying bills, fixing the house, covering for his parents while Jason coasted. He never expected a reward, but he also never expected this. His name wasn't even in the will. Every dollar, every asset, Jason's. Just a single line about loving both sons equally. Equal. After everything? His grip tightened around the paper, vision blurring with rage. When his father walked in, Brandon didn't hesitate. He held up the will, voice steady. "So this is how it is? After everything I've done?" How long had they planned this? Had they always intended for him to be nothing more than their financial safety net? Did they ever appreciate him at all? His father's voice broke his trance. "Hey, Brandon, what's taking so long?" The words barely registered. His grip tightened on the will. He didn't even bother hiding it when his father walked in. Instead, he held up the paper, his voice cold and steady. "So this is how it is? Everything to Jason? After everything I've done for you?" His father stiffened. "Brandon, it's not what you think." Brandon scoffed. "Really? Because it looks pretty damn clear." Then his mother entered. Her face paled when she saw the will in his hands, but she still said it like it should comfort him. "Brandon, honey, you have a good job. Jason, he needs the help." That was it. Years of sacrifice, reduced to an excuse, a justification for cutting him out. Brandon exhaled, setting the will back on the table. "Got it. Glad to know where we stand." Then he walked away, and for the first time he meant it. He said, his voice eerily calm. His father relaxed slightly, mistaking compliance for defeat. That was his mistake, because Brandon wasn't done. He was just getting started. The story of Brandon's betrayal spread through the family like wildfire, but no one knew the full truth, except for him. If you asked his parents, they'd say he was overreacting. If you asked his brother Jason, he'd roll his eyes and call him dramatic. But if you were there, if you saw the moment Brandon uncovered the truth, you'd know this wasn't just about money. It was about years of being used, of being lied to, of being the responsible one while Jason was rewarded for doing absolutely nothing. And it all came to a head on that ordinary afternoon when Brandon, ever the dutiful son, helped his father with paperwork and found the will that left everything to Jason. At first, he thought there had to be a mistake, a typo, maybe a missing page, but no. There it was in black and white. Every asset, every dollar, the house he had helped maintain, the mortgage he had been paying, it all belonged to Jason. And him? Nothing. A footnote in his own parents' legacy. He could have walked out right then, but he wanted to hear it from both of them. When his mother entered the room and saw the will in his hands, her face paled, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed and said it like it was supposed to comfort him. "Brandon, honey, you don't need the inheritance. You have a good job. You're independent. Jason, well, he struggles. We just want to make sure he's taken care of." That was it. That was the moment something inside Brandon shattered. They had spent years justifying Jason's entitlement, and now they had taken it to its inevitable conclusion, cutting him out completely. His hands trembled, but his voice was eerily calm as he placed the will back on the table. "Got it. Glad to know where we stand." He walked out, ignoring their protests. They had made their choice. Now he was making his. Brandon cut them off. No more mortgage payments, no more grocery runs, no more handyman work. He knew what they thought, that he'd cool off, come crawling back. Then the bills piled up, and finally, his phone buzzed. "The property taxes are due." No apology, no concern, just another demand. Brandon smirked before replying, "I'm sure Jason will handle it since the house is his and all." His mom called. He let it ring. Then another text. "Brandon, please don't be like this. We need to talk." Oh, now they wanted to talk? Now that the consequences of their decisions were kicking in? He waited an hour before replying. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. Now you can live with it." Then, predictably, Jason chimed in. "Dude, why are you being such a drama queen? Just help them out like you always do." Brandon nearly laughed. "Nah, you've got it covered, since you're the favorite and all." Silence. Then, "Oh my God, are you seriously mad about the will? Grow up, man." Brandon tilted his head, something gnawing at him. Jason was too confident, too unaffected. On impulse, he logged into their parents' shared account. The withdrawals hit him like a punch to the gut. Thousands missing. Labeled vaguely. House repairs. Medical expenses. But he knew. Jason had been draining them dry, and their parents let him. Brandon screenshot the transactions and sent them to Jason. One message. "So it wasn't just the inheritance, huh? You were stealing from them too? It's just money." Brandon was about to fire back another snarky response, but then something clicked. Jason's arrogance, his complete lack of concern, like none of this affected him, like he wasn't just inheriting the house, but something more. A bad feeling settled in Brandon's gut. He opened his laptop and logged into a shared online banking account their parents had set up years ago. He still had access, though he rarely checked it. But now, something told him to look, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Multiple large withdrawals, thousands of dollars missing, spread out over years, and each transaction labeled under something vague. House repairs, medical expenses, unexpected costs. But Brandon knew. He hadn't made those payments. Jason had. And the worst part? Their parents had blamed him for their financial problems. Every time they claimed they were struggling, every time they guilt-tripped him into paying another bill, it wasn't just bad money management. Jason had been draining them dry behind the scenes. Brandon clenched his jaw and sent a screenshot to Jason, typing just one message. "So it wasn't just the inheritance, huh? You were stealing from them too?" The typing bubble appeared instantly, then stopped, then started again, then nothing. Brandon smirked. He had him. Seconds later, his phone rang. His mother. "Brandon," she breathed, panic in her voice. "What did you say to Jason?" "He's packing his things. He's saying he's leaving town." "Oh." Brandon leaned back, exhaling slowly. So Jason wasn't just some spoiled golden child. He was a coward, too. The moment he realized he'd been caught, he ran. "That sounds like a you problem," Brandon said coolly. "I guess Jason's not as struggling as you thought, huh?" His mother stammered, but for the first time in his life, Brandon didn't care. They made their choice. Now they could live with it. Brandon stared at the screen. Just money. Just money. After everything. After years of being their crutch, their provider, their solution to every problem. After finding out they had planned all along to leave him with nothing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could say so much. He could tell Jason exactly how much he had spent keeping their parents afloat. He could tell him that just money was the only thing keeping their childhood home from foreclosure. But instead he smiled, locked his phone, and set it aside. Because karma? Karma was about to handle this for him. The downfall of Brandon's family wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, like some movie-worthy betrayal. No, it was slow, humiliating, and entirely of their own making. And the worst part? They never even saw it coming. They thought they could manipulate their way out of this like they always had. Guilt trips, entitlement, and a complete lack of accountability. But this time, Brandon wasn't playing along. This time, he was the one calling the shots. It started with the texts. His brother Jason, ever the freeloading mastermind, scoffed at the whole situation. "It's just money," he had said, conveniently forgetting that the just money he now inherited was the very thing keeping a roof over their heads. When Brandon threw it back at him, "Then you won't mind using some of that money to pay the mortgage, right?" he was met with radio silence. A few minutes later, his mother, the queen of emotional manipulation, swooped in with a guilt trip so textbook it was almost impressive. "Brandon, we're your parents. Family takes care of each other. We did so much for you growing up, and now you're just abandoning us?" Brandon took a slow, deep breath, forcing himself not to laugh at the sheer audacity. Abandoning them? He had spent years making sure they never struggled, all while they treated Jason like royalty and him like the unpaid help. Now when they had to face the consequences of their own choices, he was the selfish one? Not this time. He texted back, "You made it clear I wasn't part of the family when you left me out of the will. Now Jason can take care of you." And just like that, he knew his mother's face had gone full soap opera levels of shock and betrayal. Then came his father's turn. Unlike his mother, his dad didn't bother with fake tears. He cut straight to the usual transactional expectations. "We're not asking for much, just enough to cover the mortgage for a few more months until we figure things out. Don't be selfish. Selfish." That word had Brandon gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. He had drained his own finances to keep them afloat for years, put his own dreams on hold to make sure they were okay. And now, because he was choosing himself for once, he was selfish? He exhaled sharply, typed out number, "I'm done," and shut his phone off for the night. The next morning, though? Oh, they hit a new low. His phone buzzed. A bank transfer request. He frowned, unlocking it. His mom had actually sent him a request for $3,500. No message, no explanation. Just a demand, like he was some ATM they could keep withdrawing from. He nearly laughed at the sheer shamelessness. Declined. 5 minutes later, his phone rang. "Mom, declined." Then a text. "Brandon, I know you saw the request. Why did you decline it?" He let them sweat before finally replying, "Because it's not my responsibility. Try Jason." Another call. Declined. Then came the real panic. "We're going to lose the house if you don't help us." And there it was, the desperation. The moment the consequences finally hit, the same house they had assumed he would always keep paying for, despite having no stake in it. The same house they had promised to only Jason in the will. Brandon stared at the message, a slow smirk creeping onto his face. "Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding I didn't matter." He hit send, tossing his phone onto the couch. He almost felt bad. Almost. But then his dad chimed in, going for the ultimate manipulation tactic. "You're really going to let your parents become homeless? That one?" That actually made Brandon laugh out loud. Homeless? Please. They weren't broke. They weren't on the verge of living on the streets. They had savings. They just didn't want to dip into them because they had spent years getting comfortable with his money. He knew exactly what this was. One last desperate attempt to guilt him into submission. He ignored them for the rest of the day. And the best part? He knew this was just the beginning. The story of Brandon's betrayal wasn't just another tale of family drama. It was a case study in entitlement, manipulation, and the slow-burn satisfaction of karma doing its job. If you had told him years ago that he'd be standing in his apartment lobby, arms crossed, staring down his parents and their golden child as they demanded his money like debt collectors, he might have laughed. But here they were, in all their audacious glory, treating him like an ATM with a bad attitude. It started the night before, when Jason, the walking, talking embodiment of freeloading privilege, had the nerve to text him, "Dude, just send them the money already. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." Oh, the irony. Brandon's fingers hovered over the keyboard before he responded. "You mean the same money you're inheriting? Why don't you send it?" The reply came fast, like Jason had been waiting for this comeback. "You know, I don't have that kind of cash right now." And there it was. The minute responsibility landed on Jason's shoulders, he suddenly wasn't capable. He was fine watching Brandon drain his own finances, but the second it was his turn, he had nothing. Brandon typed back, "Guess you better figure it out then, bro. You're the one they chose." This time, there was no response, just silence. And for the first time in years, Brandon felt at peace. But the next day, oh, they escalated. A call from the front desk shattered Brandon's focus. Your parents are here?" He clenched his jaw. "Don't let them up. They're being pushy. Not my problem." Minutes later, a text. "We're downstairs. Open the door." Number Brandon stormed down to the lobby, arms crossed. His mother looked relieved to see him. His father, frustrated. Jason, bored. "Brandon, we need to talk." He didn't move. "Number, you need to leave." His dad scoffed. "Are you really letting us lose the house over a petty grudge?" Brandon's laugh was sharp. "You mean the house you promised to Jason? Let him handle it." Jason's face shifted. "Look, man, I don't even want to be involved in this." "That's the thing," Brandon said, stepping closer. "You are involved, because when the mortgage comes due, when they need money, when they finally realize they screwed up, it's on. You—" Silence. Jason swallowed. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face. Brandon smirked, stepping back. "Good luck." Then he shut the door. He didn't look back. The downfall of the golden child wasn't just predictable. It was poetic. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a simple family dispute, a son refusing to financially support his parents after years of sacrifice. But to those who really paid attention, it was the unraveling of years of entitlement, manipulation, and a well-oiled system designed to benefit one person at the expense of another. And now, that system was breaking. It started with Jason's usual entitled nonsense. "Just send them the money already, dude. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." Brandon had expected that. Jason was 28, still living in a world where problems magically disappeared the moment someone else, usually Brandon, handled them. But not this time. "You mean the same money you're inheriting? Why don't you send it?" Silence. Then the inevitable excuse. "You know I don't have that kind of cash right now." Of course he didn't. He never did. He was perfectly fine letting Brandon bleed himself dry, but when it was his turn to step up, suddenly he was broke. "Guess you better figure it out then, bro. You're the one they chose." And with that, Jason went quiet. But the real storm hit the next morning. Not with a text, not with a call, but with an ambush. Brandon was at work when his apartment's front desk called. Hey, Brandon, your parents are here?" He nearly dropped his phone. "What?" The receptionist hesitated. "They're saying it's an emergency and that you won't answer their calls." His jaw clenched. "Please don't let them up. They're being kind of pushy." A deep breath. "I don't care. Tell them to leave." Then came the texts. "We're downstairs. Open the door. No question, no explanation. Just another demand, then another. We're not leaving until you talk to us." Fine. If they wanted a confrontation, they were getting one. Brandon stormed downstairs, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with rage. The sheer audacity of these people, to show up uninvited, expecting him to cave like he was some naive teenager. Not a single apology, not even a fake attempt at sympathy, just a full-scale ambush. When he yanked open the door, there they were, Mom, Dad, and Jason standing together like a dysfunctional family mafia. Mom went straight for the theatrics. "Brandon, finally. We need to talk." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "Number, you need to leave." She blinked, like he had spoken in another language. "Excuse me? You don't get to show up at my home demanding money. That's insane." Dad scoffed. "Are you really going to let us lose the house over a petty grudge?" Brandon let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Petty grudge? Oh, you mean the one where you decided I was good enough to pay your bills, but not good enough to be in your will?" "That grudge?" Mom gasped, clutching her chest like she had been physically struck. "Brandon, that's not fair. We did what was best for the family." He tilted his head. "Best for the family?" His eyes flicked to Jason. "You mean best for him? Just say it." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Jason finally sighed, rolling his eyes. "Look, man, I don't even want to be involved in this." Brandon exhaled through his nose, a slow, amused shake of the head. "That's the thing, Jason. You are involved. Because when the mortgage comes due, when Mom and Dad can't afford to keep up, when they finally have to deal with the consequences of their choices," his voice dropped just enough to make Jason flinch, "it's on you." Jason scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Whatever," he muttered. "You're being dramatic." Brandon smiled. "Then you won't mind covering the mortgage this month." Silence. Mom turned to Jason, panic in her eyes. Dad looked at him too, and just like that, Jason finally understood. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a bluff. This was reality. The golden child's free ride, over. Brandon let the silence drag out before stepping back inside. "Good luck," he said simply, shutting the door in their faces. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because less than 24 hours later, they tried another tactic. Not begging, not apologizing, but public shaming. Facebook posts started appearing. Mom, who barely knew how to use a smartphone, had somehow figured out how to weaponize social media. The posts weren't outright attacks, but they weren't subtle either. It's heartbreaking when the child you raise turns their back on you. True family supports each other no matter what. The comments were worse. Family friends chiming in, feeding her martyr complex. "He'll regret this one day. So selfish. Money changes people." Brandon had to laugh. He had spent years pouring his money into their household, keeping them afloat, making sure they never had to struggle. And now they were calling him selfish? But what really got him was Jason. A few hours after the Facebook posts, Jason finally cracked. A single whiny text. "Dude, why are you letting them go through this? Just help them out. It's not a big deal." Brandon stared at his phone, incredulous. "Not a big deal?" He cracked his knuckles, then typed back, "You mean the money you're inheriting? Use that." Jason's response was almost instant. "You know I don't have that kind of money right now." And there it was again. The moment he had to take responsibility, he folded. Brandon smirked. "Guess you better figure it out then, bro. You're the one they chose." This time there was no response, just silence. And for the first time in his life, it was exactly what Brandon wanted. The internet loves a villain, and my family had made sure to paint me as one. The posts started trickling in, a slow, calculated drip of emotional manipulation designed to make me look like the cold-hearted son who abandoned his struggling parents. My dad's post was the first blatant jab, dripping with self-pity. So-called family should never turn their back when you need them most. We gave everything to our children, and this is how we're repaid. He even tagged me, adding a passive-aggressive, "I hope you're happy at the end," as if he were setting the stage for a public trial where I'd be found guilty by a jury of Facebook relatives and family friends. But the real masterpiece of delusion came from Jason. Oh, of course, he had to insert himself into the drama, playing the devoted son. Some people think family is just about money. They don't understand that family is about love and sacrifice. I'd do anything for my parents. But some people just don't get that. I wish some people could learn what it really means to be family. The smug undertone practically oozed through the screen. He even had the audacity to slap a generic, "I love my parents, and I'm grateful for everything they've done" at the end, as if he were the poster child of selflessness. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around my phone. They really think they can rewrite history like this? I had done everything for them. Paid bills, covered mortgage payments, bought groceries. Meanwhile, Jason sat back and enjoyed the golden child treatment, never lifting a finger. And yet somehow, I was the villain, the selfish one, the ungrateful son. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to react out of anger. That's what they wanted. They wanted me to snap, to come charging in defensively, to look as emotional and irrational as possible, so they could solidify their narrative. Number. If they were going to spin their sob story, I was going to drop facts. So I waited. Let the comments roll in. Let them enjoy their little echo chamber. And then, a few hours later, I made my move. I opened Facebook, not the one I barely used, but the one with actual friends, extended family, co-workers, people who knew me beyond my parents' filtered version of events, and I started typing. I wasn't going to say anything. I figured I'd let people believe whatever they wanted. But since my name is being dragged through the mud, let's set the record straight. I laid it all out. How I had been financially supporting my parents since I was old enough to work. How every unexpected expense, every emergency bill somehow always fell on me while Jason got a free pass. How I had been paying their mortgage, thinking I was helping them stay afloat, only to find out they had rewritten their will to leave everything to Jason, without even a mention of me. Family should be a two-way street, but I learned the hard way that I wasn't part of the family. I was just their safety net. And now that I finally decided to stop being used, suddenly I'm the villain. That's fine. Let people believe what they want. But I won't be guilt-tripped into bankrolling people who never saw me as anything more than an ATM. If anyone still thinks I'm in the wrong, you're welcome to cover their bills yourselves. I hit post. Within minutes, the notifications blew up. Some people immediately took my side. Some distant relatives, the ones who only ever saw the highlight reel of my parents' lives, awkwardly backtracked from their original comments on my dad's post. And Jason? Oh, he lost it. A new comment appeared under my post. Wow, so you're just gonna air private family matters like this? Real mature, dude. I didn't even have to respond. Someone else beat me to it. You mean like your parents have been doing all day? And just like that, the tide turned. My parents had wanted to control the narrative. They wanted to be the victims. But they weren't prepared for receipts. And as the comments piled up, I knew one thing for certain. This was the last time they'd ever use me as their personal piggy bank. This wasn't just a family feud. It was an awakening. The moment Brandon hit post, he felt it. The shift, the weight of years of manipulation lifting, the chains of obligation breaking. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just the dutiful son, the financial safety net, the forgotten backup plan. He was done. But what he didn't expect, how fast the fallout would come. Within minutes, his post exploded. Old friends, distant relatives, people who had watched his parents parade around like saints, were now seeing the truth. Comments poured in, some supportive. I had no idea, Brandon. You deserved better. Others cautious. Are you sure you're not overreacting? Family is still family. But the real chaos? That came from his parents. His phone buzzed, and he already knew. First, Jason, you're a traitor. You really had to put our business out there? You're sick. Then his dad, you have ruined everything. You'll regret this, Brandon. You'll regret turning your back on us. But for the first time, their words didn't cut. They didn't hold power anymore. Brandon didn't regret a thing. He blocked them all. Days passed and something strange happened. Silence. The usual flood of guilt-tripping messages. Gone. No passive-aggressive calls. No dramatic emails. Nothing. And then like clockwork, the whispers started reaching him. A cousin messaged him, "Dude, your parents are freaking out. They thought you'd cave." Another relative confirmed the reality. His parents weren't broke, but they were scrambling. Years of relying on Brandon's money had left them completely unprepared to stand on their own. And Jason, the golden child, the one who had never worked a day in his life, he was panicking. Because without Brandon footing the bills, his carefree, freeloading lifestyle was crumbling. Brandon could only imagine the realization sinking in. His family had bet everything on the wrong son. They had cast him aside, thinking he'd always be there. But now they were on their own. And him? He was free. For the first time in his life, he was done carrying people who never once carried him. He had chosen himself, and he had won.